It started with a scream, sharp, entitled, echoing off the polished cabin walls of first class like a blade slicing through velvet. "Get out of my seat!" The words didn't come from a flight attendant or a confused passenger. They erupted from a Hollywood icon, a man whose face had been on magazine covers and late-night talk shows for decades. Dressed in designer athleisure and oversized sunglasses, he pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at an older gentleman sitting quietly by the window. The man, wearing a worn gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase that had clearly seen more sunrises than the celebrity's career, looked up without a word. The passengers nearby shifted in their seats. Some reached for headphones. Others pretended to sleep. But tension crackled in the air like static. The celebrity's voice rose again, this time louder, angrier. "You people think you can just sneak into first class? I paid for this! You're in my damn seat!" His voice was a mixture of outrage and disbelief, the kind that only exists when someone's ego meets resistance. The flight attendant hesitated, glancing between the boarding pass in her hand and the older man, who still hadn't spoken. She was clearly nervous. The man didn't argue. He simply met the actor's fury with calm eyes that had weathered bigger storms than this. He looked like someone who knew exactly who he was, and didn't need to prove it to anyone. But the real story wasn't just in the yelling or the silence. It was in row 2B. A 14-year-old girl, traveling with her father, instinctively raised her phone and started recording. Not because she knew what would happen next, but because something felt off. She had grown up in a world of viral clips and truth caught on camera. Her generation didn't blink when power exploded. They documented it. And this moment? It was a storm brewing on the tarmac before takeoff. The actor kept ranting, calling the older man Grandpa, mocking his suit, laughing as if cruelty were currency. "You don't even look like you belong in coach," he sneered. "Who let you in here?" Still the man said nothing. He sat, hands folded, gaze unwavering. The flight attendant asked him softly, "Sir, would you be willing to move seats, just to de-escalate the situation?" That was when he finally spoke, his voice deep and steady, the kind that doesn't beg for respect. It commands it. "I believe I'm in the correct seat, but I'm willing to hear him out." The entire cabin paused. There was something in his tone, in the way he said it, that made even the shouting actor blink. For a moment, the rage faltered. Just a moment. But in that breath of hesitation, a ripple passed through the air. Whispers started. A man in the back leaned forward. A woman near the galley raised an eyebrow. Someone said, barely audibly, "Wait, is that John Kennedy?" Not the president, no, but a current U.S. senator, one who had served for years, who had helped write laws and comforted victims of floods and storms back home. The same man now being publicly humiliated by someone who couldn't recognize dignity without designer labels. The actor, oblivious, scoffed again. "Nice cosplay, old man," he snorted. The pilot stepped out, quietly, calmly. He looked at the older man, then smiled slightly and said, "Senator Kennedy, I'm sorry for the delay. We'll handle this." And that, right there, that's when the temperature in the cabin changed. That's when the rage turned to confusion. That's when the camera in row 2B captured a freeze frame that would go viral before the plane even landed. The actor's face drained of color, his mouth opened, but no words came. The whispers grew louder, phones started to rise. The calm man he had belittled for the last 5 minutes had just been called Senator. A man with power, yes, but more importantly, a man who had chosen not to use it, even when humiliated. And if you've been here this long, if your jaw clenched or your heart stirred during that confrontation, maybe you understand why moments like these matter. Maybe you've seen someone treated unfairly because of how they look or dress. If that hit something in you, I want you to like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and comment the number 9 if you believe dignity always speaks loudest in silence. Because what happens next? Well, it's about to change everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, heart-thudding kind that makes the skin on your arms prickle. The celebrity, still standing in the aisle, was visibly shaken. His sunglasses had slid down his nose, revealing wide eyes darting from face to face, searching for allies in the sea of passengers now staring at him, not with admiration, but with quiet judgment. Senator John Kennedy didn't move. He simply turned his head slightly toward the pilot, nodded once, then shifted his gaze back toward the man who had just spent the last 5 minutes trying to publicly shred his dignity. There was no bitterness in his eyes, no smirk, no hint of revenge, just the calm you see in a man who's been underestimated so often that he's learned how to make silence his sharpest weapon. The actor stammered, "Look, I didn't know who he was, okay? He looked like... But he couldn't finish the sentence. Because anything he might have said would only reveal more about himself than about the man he had tried to humiliate. The flight attendant took a slow step forward. "Sir," she said, carefully choosing her words, "would you like a different seat to be more comfortable?" She wasn't asking Senator Kennedy. She was asking the actor, and that's when he realized he'd lost control. The balance of power had shifted completely. Passengers whispered, a few phones still recording. The girl in row 2B hadn't stopped. She hadn't said a word, but her camera never dropped. Her father leaned in and whispered, "Keep filming. The truth matters." The actor shook his head and tried to laugh. "You all need to relax. It was just a misunderstanding, a joke." But nobody was laughing. The jokes had curdled, the moment had soured, and now he stood under a spotlight that had nothing to do with film sets or scripted lines. This was raw, unedited, real. Senator Kennedy finally spoke again, and his words didn't come from a place of anger. They came from somewhere deeper. "A joke," he said slowly, his voice cutting through the cabin with the precision of a surgeon's blade. "If you have to explain it, maybe it wasn't one." His voice was soft, but it carried weight. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The kind that silences entire rooms. The actor opened his mouth again, but the pilot gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's talk privately," he said. "In the galley." For a split second, the celebrity resisted, but then he saw the phones still filming, the faces still watching, the quiet condemnation etched in every expression. So he turned and followed the pilot down the aisle, each step slower than the last. As the galley door closed behind him, the cabin exhaled. It was like the pressure valve had been released. The whispers resumed. The girl lowered her phone for the first time and looked over at Senator Kennedy. He caught her eye and gave her a small nod. Not of thanks, but of respect. The kind of nod a soldier gives another in the middle of a long, silent war. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. 15 minutes passed. The plane remained at the gate. Then the galley door opened again. The pilot returned to the front and made a brief announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." But the actor didn't come back to his seat. Instead, a gate agent boarded quietly, walked down the aisle, and returned with his carry-on. He had been removed. No words, no grand exit, just silence and a bag. Passengers began clapping, not in celebration, but in release. The tension had finally broken. And at the center of it all sat John Kennedy, hands folded on his lap, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had. Something enormous. A man with global fame had tried to use shame as a weapon, and failed spectacularly, because the person he tried to belittle refused to swing back. And because one quiet teenager decided to hold up a phone and capture the truth before it disappeared behind excuses. Later, when asked why he never raised his voice, Senator Kennedy would simply say, "When someone throws a stone, sometimes the best thing to do is let it drop. And let everyone watch how low they're willing to go. And if you're still with us now, if you felt something shift when that galley door opened and he never returned, then you understand what real power looks like. It's not loud, it doesn't need permission, and it never looks down on anyone. Because true dignity doesn't come from a name tag or a movie credit. It comes from how you treat the person next to you when you think no one is watching, but someone always is. And sometimes, she's only 14. The flight finally took off, but no one was sleeping. Not really. There was a quiet buzz in the cabin, the kind that hums beneath the surface when people know they've just witnessed something they'll remember for the rest of their lives. Phones were tucked away, but the footage had already started to spread. AirDrop, messages, social media drafts waiting for Wi-Fi to kick in at 30,000 feet. And somewhere in that digital swirl, the first headline was already forming, even though no one had written it yet. The celebrity had boarded with the air of royalty. He left like a shadow. And the man he had tried to humiliate? He stayed. Dignified. Still. Present. Senator Kennedy didn't speak much during the flight. He didn't need to. A flight attendant brought him coffee, silently, with a touch more care than usual. The captain sent back a note, handwritten, folded, and delivered discreetly. Kennedy opened it slowly, read it, and nodded to himself. No response needed. His tray table stayed up. His eyes rested on the clouds outside the window. But his mind? That was elsewhere. 2 hours in, someone approached him. A woman, maybe in her early 50s, from economy class. Her hands were trembling, and she clutched a copy of a paperback novel like it was armor. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you for how you handled that. My son, he's different. He gets mocked for it. Seeing someone stay calm like that, it meant something to me." Kennedy didn't say much, just reached out, gently placed a hand on hers, and said, "You don't always get to choose what people throw at you, but you can choose how you catch it." Her eyes watered, and she nodded. Then she returned to her seat, clutching that sentence like it was scripture. Behind them, the teenager in row 2B finally looked through her footage. It was all there, every word, every sneer, every second of the unraveling. Her hands shook a little. Her dad leaned over and asked, "You okay?" She nodded slowly, then whispered, "Should I post it?" He thought for a moment. "Do you think the world needs to see it?" She didn't answer right away. She just pressed her lips together, took a breath, and said, "I think people forget what respect looks like. This reminds them." When the flight landed, everything moved in slow motion. As passengers gathered bags and unbuckled belts, a strange, quiet reverence lingered. Kennedy stood, waiting his turn like everyone else. No special treatment, no staff rushing in. He helped an elderly woman pull down her luggage, smiled at a toddler peeking over the seat, thanked the crew like they were family. And when he stepped off the plane, flashbulbs didn't greet him. Yet. But the storm was already gathering. Not a bad one, not a scandal. A reckoning. By the time his feet touched the ground, the footage was live. The video, uploaded with the caption, "Fame doesn't make you right. Watch this," had already hit 1.2 million views. And that was just in the first hour. News outlets picked it up fast. Hollywood meltdown at 30,000 feet. Senator humiliated, then recognized. One man's silence shamed a celebrity. Headlines blurred together, but the footage was crystal clear. The actor's voice, the insults, the way he looked down on someone he didn't recognize. And then the twist. The pilot calling him senator. The stunned silence. The quiet fall from grace. Some tried to defend the actor, said he was tired, stressed, misunderstood. But the public wasn't buying it, because they'd seen too many stories like this, too many people with power using it to belittle others, and too few moments when that power was met, not with outrage or revenge, but with composure, with grace, with quiet, unshakable dignity. Senator Kennedy didn't tweet, he didn't go on the news, he didn't issue a statement. He didn't need to. The video was speaking for him, and what it said was louder than any press release ever could. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the Capitol skyline, the girl from row 2B sat on her bed, watching the view count rise. 10 million, 12, 16. She wasn't chasing fame. She didn't even show her face. She just wanted people to know what had happened. And maybe, just maybe, to ask themselves, if I had been on that plane, would I have said something? Would I have stood up? Or would I have stayed quiet, hoping it would all just pass? And if you're watching this now, if something about this story stayed with you, maybe it's time to ask yourself the same question, because moments like this don't just happen in headlines. They happen every day, in classrooms, in coffee shops, on subway platforms, and most people won't have a title like senator to protect them. All they'll have is you. So when the moment comes, and someone needs your voice, will you raise it? Or will you pretend not to see? By the next morning, the video had reached critical mass. It wasn't just viral, it was everywhere. Morning talk shows played the clip on loop, cutting between the actor's outburst and Senator Kennedy's steady, unflinching presence. Commentators were divided, as always, but the public was not. The court of opinion had already rendered its verdict, and the message was clear. You don't get to scream your status in someone's face and expect to walk away untouched. Not anymore. Not when a teenager with a phone can hold a mirror to your ego and show the world who you really are. The actors' team released a statement before noon. It was exactly what people expected. Wordy, vague, and drenched in PR polish. I was under a great deal of stress. My reaction does not reflect who I am. But the world had already seen who he was, and no carefully scripted apology could unsee what millions had watched unfold in real time. His social media was flooded, not with support, but with disappointment. Former fans unfollowed, brand partners went silent, talk show invites were quietly withdrawn, and all the while Senator John Kennedy said nothing. Not a word. He went about his schedule like any other day. Meetings, calls, community outreach. When reporters caught up with him outside a public library that afternoon, he offered only a smile and a nod. One asked, "Senator, any comment on the incident?" He paused, adjusted his collar, and said, "Respect doesn't need an audience. But sometimes, disrespect deserves one." Then he walked inside, leaving behind a trail of silence far louder than any speech could have been. Meanwhile, the girl who filmed the entire moment, her name was Emily, was getting messages from strangers around the world. Some thanked her. Others told her she had changed how they thought about silence and courage. A few even sent stories of moments where they stayed quiet and regretted it. Emily didn't feel like a hero. She had just done what felt right. But her dad, watching her read those messages, said something she'd never forget. "You gave the world a flashlight in a room it pretended wasn't dark." That night, something else shifted. One of the actor's former co-stars posted the video with no caption, just a facepalm emoji. A late-night host joked, Apparently, first class comes with a side of humility, if you survive the appetizer. But the laughter was hollow. Because what really spread wasn't comedy, it was clarity. A reminder that the people who walk quietly, who wear no labels, who say little, are often the ones carrying the most weight. And when that truth is disrespected, when decency is treated like weakness, the backlash can be seismic. But this story isn't about punishment. It's about contrast. And nothing revealed that more than what happened next. 2 days after the video hit 50 million views, a woman approached Senator Kennedy during a town hall. She held a framed photo of her husband, a veteran who had passed away the year before. Her hands trembled as she spoke. He was a quiet man, like you. He got mocked a lot for how he dressed. People assumed he wasn't smart, but he always said, "You don't need to be loud to be heard." Thank you for showing the world what that means. Kennedy took the photo, looked at it for a long moment, and nodded. Sounds like he had a lot to say. She smiled through her tears. He did, but people only heard him after he was gone. The senator looked out over the crowd, some standing, some seated, all silent. Then let's make sure we hear each other now, while we're still here. And maybe that's what made this story hit differently. Not just the takedown of a celebrity, not just the quiet power of a senator, but the deeper truth underneath, that every day, all around us, someone is watching. Someone is deciding whether to stay silent or to stand up, whether to ignore the moment or press record. And you don't need a title to make an impact. You don't need a microphone or a badge or a blue check mark. You just need to care. You just need to notice. Because the next time someone tries to tear another human being down in public, the real question won't be about who yelled the loudest. It'll be about who stood the tallest. So if this story moved you, don't just scroll. Share it. Talk about it. And if you've ever been in Emily's shoes, or Senator Kennedy's, drop a 9 in the comments to let others know they're not alone. Because what you choose to do when no one else speaks up, that's who you really are. 3 days after the flight, the fallout was no longer a ripple. It was a wave crashing through headlines, talk shows, and living rooms across the country. The video had now crossed 85 million views. News anchors analyzed it frame by frame. Psychologists were invited to discuss public humiliation and ego collapse. Opinion pieces filled every corner of the internet, dissecting how a moment of unchecked arrogance had ignited a cultural nerve. And at the center of it all was a man who never raised his voice and a teenage girl who never lowered her phone. The actor, once adored for his bold roles and sharp wit, had become a symbol, though not the kind anyone wants. Brands dropped him quietly. Streaming platforms paused future projects. One major studio even scrubbed his name from a panel appearance. He went live on Instagram to apologize again, this time visibly shaken, less polished. I lost my temper. I made assumptions. I didn't recognize him. But that shouldn't have mattered. I was wrong. But it was too late. Not because people were cruel, but because they were tired. Tired of fame being used like armor. Tired of kindness being confused for weakness. Senator Kennedy, meanwhile, continued as if nothing had changed. He held his meetings, showed up at small-town events, and returned every handshake with the same grounded humility he always had. He turned down every interview about the flight. When a journalist pressed him at a diner in Baton Rouge, he smiled gently and said, "What I went through on that plane, that happens to someone else every day. The only difference is, this time, someone was watching." But something about that line, "someone was watching," struck a chord. Suddenly, stories began pouring in. Emails, letters, videos. Strangers from across the country started sharing their own moments of public disrespect, of being looked down on because of how they spoke, dressed, or where they were seated. A janitor in Chicago posted a video of being berated in an office lobby. He had done nothing wrong, just wore his uniform into the wrong elevator. A nurse in Arizona recalled being mocked at a grocery store after a double shift. The comments were flooded with support, all inspired by one simple story that had exposed how deeply the world still misjudged quiet dignity. And then something remarkable happened. Emily, the 14-year-old who filmed the video, was invited to speak at a school board meeting in her hometown. She didn't want to go at first. "I'm not good at talking," she told her dad. But he looked her in the eye and said, "You don't have to be loud, you just have to be honest." So she stood at that microphone in a room full of adults and said, "I didn't film that video to go viral. I filmed it because I've seen too many people pretend not to see. I just didn't want to be one of them." The clip of her speech went viral too. Not because she cried. She didn't. Not because she yelled. She didn't. But because she told the truth, and it hit people where it hurt. Senator Kennedy, upon seeing the speech, sent her a handwritten note. Not typed, not emailed. A real letter. It said, "Dear Emily, you reminded the world that sometimes courage looks like a phone in a quiet hand. Thank you for not looking away. With respect, John Kennedy." A week later, a movement began. Accidentally, people started tagging their own posts with the hashtag number someone was watching. Videos of everyday decency. People stepping in when someone was mistreated. Kids helping classmates. Bystanders confronting bad behavior. It wasn't a trend. It was a reminder. A message wrapped in humility. You don't need to be a hero to change a moment. You just need to be there. In the background, the actor who started it all disappeared from the spotlight. He issued one final statement before deleting his accounts. "I hope the man I yelled at never sees me again. But if he does, I hope he knows I'm trying to be better." And Senator Kennedy? He never spoke about the incident again. Because, for him, the lesson wasn't about revenge or reputation. It was about what happens when restraint meets rage and wins. It was about the strength in stillness and the power of being someone worth watching. So if this part of the story made your chest tighten, if it reminded you of a time you were overlooked, or worse, humiliated for being calm when others were cruel, then don't let this be the end. Share it. Tag someone who needs to see it. And drop a 9 in the comments if you believe the world changes when people stop pretending not to see. Because whether you know it or not, someone is always watching. Weeks passed. The headlines shifted. A new celebrity scandal, a sports controversy. The algorithm moved on, but something about the story of that flight lingered. It wasn't loud anymore, but it didn't fade either. It lived in quiet corners of conversations. In classrooms where teachers showed the clip to spark discussion. In offices where HR departments rewrote their training modules. In homes where parents turned to their kids and said, "Let me tell you why this matters." Senator Kennedy never used the incident for political gain. He didn't repost the clip. He didn't give sound bites. But his schedule subtly changed. He began showing up to high schools, community centers, and public libraries, places without cameras or microphones. In each visit, he didn't talk about the flight. He talked about the silence that follows disrespect and how dangerous it is when people get used to it. At one community gathering, a young man stood and asked, "How did you stay so calm when he was yelling at you?" The room went still. Kennedy smiled gently and replied, "Because I wasn't trying to win the moment. I was trying not to lose myself." That line would become a quote printed on T-shirts, murals, and even one high school auditorium wall. But he hadn't meant it to be profound. He meant it as a truth we forget too easily in a world that rewards shouting over listening. Meanwhile, Emily, now dubbed the girl with the camera, was offered interviews, sponsorships, even a documentary deal. She turned most of them down. "I'm not the story," she said simply. "He is." But one thing she didn't say no to was starting a small project with her dad called Eyes Open. It was a non-profit dedicated to teaching young people how to safely document injustice, speak up in public spaces, and recognize when someone needs help. It wasn't about catching people in the act. It was about reminding people they're not invisible. The movement kept growing, not in waves, but in quiet ripples. A bus driver defended a child from being mocked and said, "I remembered that plane story." A barista refused to serve a customer who berated her co-worker and quoted Kennedy's words, "Let's not lose ourselves. Stories like these didn't go viral. Most weren't even recorded. But they were felt, and in that way, they lived." Then one day, months after the incident, Kennedy received a letter. No return address, just a thick envelope, slightly creased. Inside was a handwritten note. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I do want you to know I watched the video over and over, and I realized I've spent years confusing fame with worth. That day you didn't just keep your seat, you kept your soul. I hope one day I can say the same." No name was signed, but it didn't have to be. Kennedy folded the letter slowly, tucked it into the inside pocket of his blazer, and walked outside into the morning light. And maybe that's how the best stories end. Not with applause, not with justice served like a cold dish, but with a change that lives quietly in the hearts of people who saw something true and chose to carry it forward. Because this story was never about a seat on a plane. It was about the seat we each choose in life, whether we stand above others or beside them, whether we shout someone down or lift them up, whether we use our power to protect or to punish. So if you've been here from the beginning, if you felt the sting of that first shout, the breath-holding silence that followed, and the quiet strength that turned the tide, then let this be your reminder. You don't need to be a senator to stand tall. You don't need millions of followers to hold the line. You just need to care enough to stay calm when the world gets loud, to hold your ground, to press record, to speak up when it counts. Because real dignity isn't about being recognized. It's about remembering who you are when no one else does. And if that message speaks to you, share this story. Tag someone who's walked through fire and kept their grace. And if you've ever seen someone do the right thing when it was easier not to, drop a 9 in the comments. For the ones who stay calm, for the ones who don't flinch, for the ones who prove that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's wisdom. And that wisdom is worth watching.